Somebody shout to something. When God is up to something, the atmosphere shifts. The winds start to blow in a different direction. You can't always explain it. You can't always trace it, but deep in your spirit, you know something is moving, is moving. It's that still, small whisper that says, hey, get ready. It's that holy agitation that stirs your peace, not to steal it, but to stretch it, to prepare you. Because when God is up to something, he will disturb your comfort to deliver your calling. Oh, I feel this thing. You see, God doesn't always announce what he's doing with fanfare and fireworks. Sometimes he hides his hand while he's moving mountains behind the scenes. You thought the silence meant nothing was happening, but heaven was busy on your behalf. Don't mistake God's silence for his absence. In fact, some of God's greatest works are done in the dark. He formed the world in the dark. He formed you in the dark. He brought Jesus out of the tomb in the dark. So don't curse the dark seasons of your life. They're evidence that God is creating something new. Oh, he's up to something. Oh, he's up to something. When the doors start closing, when the friends start walking, when the plan falls apart, that's not rejection. That's redirection. Because when God is up to something, he'll shake your situation so he can shift your destiny. You thought it was the end, but it was just the bend. Don't be fooled by how it looks right now. God specializes in using the least likely at the last minute to do the unimaginable. He'll use a shepherd boy to slay a giant. He'll use a stuttering man to speak to Pharaoh. He'll use a barren womb to birth a nation. Because when God is up to something, logic has to sit down and faith has to rise up. Oh, I feel the weight of glory in this word. He's not trying to impress you. He's trying to prepare you. Sometimes he'll strip you to bless you. Sometimes he'll break you to build you. Sometimes he'll delay you to develop you. Because what he's about to release, you're not ready to receive it unless you've been processed for it. So, if you're in the fire, if you're in the flood, if you're in the fight, lift your hands and say, Lord, I trust you because I know you're up to something. Hallelujah. Don't despise the process. Don't rush the season. God is not punishing you. He's positioning you. He's enlarging your capacity so you don't collapse under the weight of your next blessing. Because what's coming is going to be bigger than what's been. You're about to step into a season of divine alignment. People will look at you and wonder how you got there. But they didn't see the tears. They didn't hear the prayers. They didn't feel the crushing. But God did. And he said, because you stayed faithful when it didn't make sense, I'm about to reward you in a way that doesn't make sense. Ah, glory. The storm didn't come to destroy you. It came to reveal you. The betrayal didn't come to break you. It came to bless you. Because when God is up to something, everything the enemy meant for evil, God will turn it around for good. So stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Don't run, don't panic, don't quit. You're not forgotten. You're not forsaken. You're not finished. You are standing on the edge of the miraculous. You are walking into a divine setup. You are stepping into what God has already spoken. Because when God is up to something, no devil in hell can stop it. God works in silence and obscurity. When we look at our lives, we often seek the loud, the visible, and the immediate. We want signs, we want clarity, we want answers that are as bright and bold as a flashing light. But what if I told you that in the silence, in the quiet moments, God is doing some of his most profound work? What if I told you that God's best moves are often hidden, waiting for the perfect time to be revealed? There's something about the quiet that God uses to work on our hearts, to mold our character, to prepare us for what's ahead. Think about it. The universe was created in the dark when there was no form and no shape. God didn't call out to the earth in broad daylight with a megaphone. He spoke in the midst of emptiness. In the absence of sound, he created the world. The first act of creation wasn't something visible or loud. It was a divine decision made in silence. The same is true for our lives. When we feel like nothing is happening, when the world around us seems to be on pause, God is working in ways we can't see or understand at the moment. In those moments of silence, God is preparing the soil of our hearts, readying us for what he's about to plant. Sometimes we don't know what we're being prepared for because we're too focused on the noise of our immediate surroundings. We're distracted by what we want to happen right now, and in the process, we miss the work being done underneath the surface. Think of a seed that's buried in the ground. It doesn't sprout immediately. It's in the dark earth, hidden away, but something powerful is happening beneath the surface. The seed is breaking open. Roots are forming, and soon enough it will push through the soil to reveal new life. God's work in the silence is like that. It's not that he's absent or not moving, it's that his movements are often imperceptible at first. And it's in these quiet moments that he's cultivating our faith, developing our resilience, and preparing us for the purpose he has in store. The silence forces us to trust him in ways we wouldn't have to if things were loud and obvious. We have no choice but to lean into him, to trust that even when we don't see the results, he is still at work. It's in those times that we're learning the power of patience, the strength of quiet endurance. God works in silence and obscurity because it teaches us how to wait. Waiting is never easy, but it's in the waiting that we develop a deep, unwavering faith. If we knew exactly when and how God was going to move, we'd have no reason to trust him. But the silence teaches us that he doesn't work on our timetable. He works on his own, and his timing is always perfect. It's in those moments when we can't hear his voice, when we don't see any immediate signs of progress, that we are stretched and grown in our ability to trust in his plans for us. Think about the story of Joseph. For years, Joseph was in the silence. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and then forgotten in prison. He was in a dark place, and yet God was working. In the silence of those years, God was preparing Joseph for the palace. Joseph couldn't have known what was coming. He couldn't see the big picture, and yet in every moment of silence, God was orchestrating his future. Joseph's obedience, faithfulness, and character were being shaped in the unseen places. This is the pattern we see throughout Scripture. God often works in hidden ways, in places that don't seem significant to the natural eye. We don't always understand why things are taking longer than we anticipated, or why we feel like we're in a holding pattern. But the reality is that God is at work. He is always working in the silence, even when we can't perceive it. In the obscurity, God is preparing us for what he has ahead. We're being shaped, molded, and refined. And when the time is right, when we are ready, he will reveal the fullness of what he's been doing all along. But until then, we must trust the process. We must trust that even in the silence, God is at work, shaping, refining, and preparing us for the next step in his plan. Disruption is often divine preparation. When life seems to be spinning out of control, when everything you've built starts to crumble, and when your plans seem to be interrupted, it's easy to assume that things are falling apart. We often view disruption as an enemy, something that works against us. We see it as a threat to our peace, our comfort, and our sense of security. But what if I told you that in many cases, disruption is not a hindrance but a divine invitation to something greater? We have to understand that God's ways are not our ways, and his timing is not our timing. What we perceive as chaos or confusion might actually be the very thing God is using to prepare us for something bigger than we can imagine. Disruptions, interruptions, and unexpected shifts are often the methods God uses to get our attention, to redirect our paths, and to refine our character. It's in the disruption that God often does his most profound work. Think about the story of the Israelites. They were slaves in Egypt, trapped in a cycle of oppression and despair. But then God disrupted everything. He sent Moses to challenge Pharaoh, to bring about the plagues, and to demand freedom for his people. What looked like a series of devastating events, a disruption to the status quo, was actually the beginning of their deliverance. If the Israelites had never been disrupted, they would have never experienced the freedom that God had promised them. The disruption was necessary for their breakthrough. When we face disruptions, we tend to get upset, frustrated, or even angry. We want life to be smooth and predictable. We don't want our plans to be interrupted, our peace to be disturbed, our comfort zones to be shaken. But what if God is using the very thing we resist to push us into a new season? What if he's using the disruption to help us grow, to force us to rely on him more, and to prepare us for the blessings he has in store? Disruptions force us to confront our limitations. When things are disrupted, we can't rely on our own strategies or systems. We're forced to turn to God to seek his guidance and trust his plan. The comfort of predictability is removed, and we're left with the raw, unrefined trust in God. This is where growth happens. When we're no longer in control, we begin to see how much we need God, how much we rely on his provision, and how faithful he is to guide us through every season of life. Disruptions strip away the illusion of self-sufficiency and reveal our dependence on God. God doesn't just allow disruptions, He orchestrates them. He allows the unexpected to shake us because He knows that only through the shaking will we be ready for what He has prepared. Think about the way a seed grows. It has to break open in order to grow. The seed doesn't sprout until it experiences some level of disruption. The same is true for us. Sometimes we have to be broken open by life's disruptions so that we can step into the new season God has designed for us. Take, for example, the story of Paul. Paul was a man of great passion, a man on a mission. He was zealous for his beliefs, and he thought he was serving God, but he was going in the wrong direction. Then came the disruption on the road to Damascus, blinding light, a voice from heaven, a complete turnaround. The disruption wasn't a punishment. It was divine preparation for the ministry Paul was about to undertake. His life was radically transformed, and the disruption served as the catalyst for his true calling to unfold. It's easy to get discouraged when we face unexpected changes or when our lives are thrown into chaos. But we must remember that God often uses the most challenging disruptions to set us up for His purpose. When we feel like we're losing control, we need to trust that God is in control. He is using the very thing that seems to be breaking us to build us, to shape us, and to position us for the next phase of our journey. Disruption might not feel comfortable, and it might not come in the way we expect, but it is often God's way of moving us from one level to another. Just because things are falling apart doesn't mean they are falling away from God's plan. It means that He is breaking down what needs to be broken down in order to build something stronger, something better. Through disruption, God is positioning us for what's next, something bigger, something greater, something beyond our comprehension. So, the next time life throws a curveball, the next time your plans are interrupted, take a deep breath and ask God, what are you preparing me for? Rejection is redirection. We've all experienced the sting of rejection. Whether it's a missed opportunity, an unreturned phone call, a closed door, or a relationship that falls apart, rejection is something that feels painful, discouraging, and often isolating. In those moments, it's easy to question your worth, your purpose, and your future. But what if I told you that rejection isn't always a setback? Sometimes it's God's way of setting you up for something greater. You see, we have a tendency to view rejection as a failure. We often see it as a reflection of our inadequacy or a sign that we're not good enough. We take it personally, and it hurts deeply. But what if rejection is not a reflection of your worth? What if it's actually God's way of guiding you away from something that wasn't meant for you in the first place? Rejection is not the end of your story. It's a redirection to something better. Think about the story of David. As a young boy, David was overlooked by his own family. When the prophet Samuel came to anoint the next king of Israel, David's brothers were paraded before him one by one. But Samuel didn't choose any of them. Instead, he asked, "Are these all your sons?" And David, the one who was rejected, the one who wasn't even considered worthy to stand in the line of candidates, was brought in from the field. He was anointed king, even though he had been dismissed by those closest to him. What appeared to be rejection from his family was actually God's redirection to a greater purpose. That rejection led David to his calling. Rejection often comes when we least expect it, and we find ourselves confused, frustrated, and hurt. But God is in the business of using the very thing that looks like a setback to move us into a new direction. He closes one door to open another. And sometimes the door He closes is the one that would have led us down a path we weren't meant to walk. We may not understand it in the moment, but rejection can be God's way of protecting us from something less than is best for us. Take, for instance, the story of Joseph. Joseph's brothers rejected him, sold him into slavery, and left him for dead. In the natural, this was the ultimate betrayal, a complete rejection by his own family. Yet, what looked like a disaster in Joseph's life was actually a divine plan in motion. Joseph's rejection led him to Egypt, where he rose to power and became the second most influential man in the kingdom. His position ultimately allowed him to save his family during a time of famine. The rejection was God's way of redirecting Joseph to a place where he could fulfill his purpose and be a blessing to those who had rejected him. Rejection also has a way of revealing your true calling. When the doors close, when the people walk away, you are often left standing with nothing but your faith and your purpose. It's in those moments that God gets your attention. Rejection can push you to seek God more deeply, to rely on His strength, and to trust His plan when everything else seems uncertain. It forces you to examine what you truly want in life and to discern where God is leading you. There are times when we become so attached to certain things, jobs, relationships, dreams, that we believe we can't move forward without them. But God, in His wisdom, knows that some of those things are not meant for us. He knows that holding on to them will keep us from stepping into the fullness of what He has prepared for us. So, He allows rejection to sever the ties to what we thought we needed, making room for what He has already destined for us. And let's not forget that even Jesus Himself faced rejection. He was rejected by the very people He came to save. He was betrayed by one of His closest disciples and denied by another. He was mocked, ridiculed, and ultimately crucified. But His rejection wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the greatest redirection in history. Through His rejection, salvation came to the world. What appeared to be defeat was actually the ultimate victory. Jesus' rejection led to His resurrection. And through His resurrection, He provided a way for all of us to be reconciled to God. Rejection is not the end. It's often just the beginning of something new. When doors close, don't despair. When people walk away, don't get discouraged. God has a way of using rejection to redirect you to something better, something more aligned with His purpose for your life. Trust the process. Trust that the closed doors are simply leading you to the open ones. Trust that God's a no is always preparing you for His yes. And remember, rejection is not a reflection of your worth. It's an opportunity for redirection. God is guiding you, protecting you, and setting you up for something greater than you can imagine. Faith over logic and divine movements. There are moments in life when God calls us to step out in faith, to move in a direction that makes no sense, that defies all logic, and challenges every ounce of our reasoning. In these moments, we stand at a crossroads. Will we trust what we can see and understand, or will we surrender to the unseen hand of God, even when it goes against everything our minds tell us? This is the essence of divine movement, the moment where faith has to rise above logic, where trust in God's plan must override the limitations of human understanding. When God moves, He doesn't always follow the blueprint we expect. He doesn't consult our plans, and He certainly doesn't need our approval. His movements often defy our natural understanding. God will call us into seasons and circumstances that stretch us, challenge us, and sometimes even scare us. And in those moments, the world will scream, "It doesn't make sense." But God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and His plans are infinitely greater than our finite minds can comprehend. The story of Abraham is a perfect example of this. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations. But there was a problem. Abraham was old, and his wife Sarah was barren. On top of that, God told Abraham to leave everything he knew and go to a land that God would show him. No map, no directions, just a promise that seemed impossible. Logically, it made no sense. Abraham had to make a decision. Would he trust God's word, or would he stay where it was safe and comfortable? But Abraham chose faith. He chose to trust in the promise, even when the path ahead was unclear. He obeyed God's command to leave everything behind, to step into the unknown. And because of his faith, God did the impossible. He opened Sarah's womb, and they had a son, Isaac. Abraham's faith, despite the illogical circumstances, set the stage for the fulfillment of God's promise. God doesn't require our understanding. He requires our trust. And faith always moves beyond logic into the realm of the supernatural. It's easy to follow God when everything aligns with our understanding, when His plans fit neatly into our expectations. But when God calls us into something that doesn't make sense, when the path seems uncertain and fraught with difficulty, it's in those moments that faith becomes the bridge between where we are and where God wants us to go. When logic says a no, faith says a yes to God's direction, even when we can't see the whole picture. Think about the Israelites. They found themselves trapped between Pharaoh's army and the Red Sea, with no way out. Logically, it was a death sentence. They had no weapons, no escape route, and no hope. But God told Moses to stretch out his staff over the sea, and when he did, the waters parted. The Israelites walked through on dry land, and Pharaoh's army was drowned. He was drowned. From a logical standpoint, that's impossible. But in the realm of divine movement, it was exactly what God had planned. Faith didn't make sense, but it was the key to the miracle. When we're in a situation where logic doesn't work, where the way forward isn't clear, and where our understanding fails us, God asks us to trust Him. He asks us to walk by faith, not by sight. This doesn't mean we ignore the facts or live in denial. It means we acknowledge that God is greater than any situation we face, and that His ways are higher than any human strategy. Logic will tell us it's impossible, but faith will tell us that with God, all things are possible. Consider Peter stepping out of the boat to walk on water. He saw Jesus walking toward him, and Jesus called him to come. Peter had never walked on water before, and had defied every law of nature, but he stepped out in faith. As long as his eyes were on Jesus, he was walking on water. But when he focused on the wind and the waves, logic kicked in, and he began to sink. Faith kept him afloat, and it was only when he allowed fear and logic to override his faith that he faltered. The lesson here is clear. When God calls us to move, we must keep our eyes on Him. As long as we do, we can walk through the impossible. But when we allow logic, doubt, and fear to dominate, we risk sinking. God's divine movements often ask us to operate outside the boundaries of logic and human reasoning. He will ask us to step out in faith, to trust Him when everything around us says it's impossible. And in those moments, we have a choice. We can choose to let logic rule our decisions, or we can choose to follow the voice of God even when it doesn't make sense. When we choose faith over logic, we open ourselves to the miraculous, to the extraordinary, and to the impossible becoming possible in God's hands. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It is the conviction that God will do what He said He would do, even when our eyes can't yet see it. Faith in God's plan doesn't always align with our logic, but it always leads to divine victory. So, when God calls you to move, when the road ahead seems unclear and illogical, step out in faith. It's in those moments that God will move in ways that will astonish you, because His ways are always higher than ours. Process precedes promotion. We live in a world that craves instant gratification. We want the rewards without the wait, the accolades without the struggle, the position without the process. We've been conditioned to expect fast results, but the truth is that in God's kingdom, process always precedes promotion. Before God elevates us, He takes us through a journey of preparation that shapes our character, strengthens our faith, and equips us for the responsibility of what He's about to give us. In the natural, we often see someone's success and think, I want that. We envy their position, their achievements, their influence, and we desire to be where they are. But what we fail to see is the process they went through to get there. We see the promotion, but don't understand the process that preceded it. We admire the finished product, but fail to recognize the struggle, the sacrifice, and the testing that took place behind the scenes. Think about Joseph. His journey to the palace wasn't immediate. It wasn't without setbacks, betrayals, and hardships. Joseph had a dream, a vision of greatness, but before he could step into that dream, he had to endure rejection, betrayal by his brothers, being sold into slavery, falsely accused and imprisoned. All of this was part of his process. At the time, it seemed like he was being punished, but God was refining him. Every setback, every heartache, every trial was preparing him for the promotion that was coming. Joseph didn't skip the process. If he had, he wouldn't have been ready to manage the kingdom. He wouldn't have had the wisdom to govern in a time of famine. The process was necessary for his promotion. And when his time came, when he stood before Pharaoh and interpreted the dream, Joseph didn't just receive a position. He received a level of authority that allowed him to fulfill the purpose God had set for him all along. The promotion was a direct result of the preparation that God had taken him through. David is another powerful example. As a young boy, he was anointed to be king. But before he ever wore the crown, he spent years in the wilderness. He fought lions and bears while tending to sheep. He was rejected by his brothers and even mocked by them. But David didn't rush the process. He didn't demand his position. He embraced the process, knowing that God was preparing him for something greater. When the time came, David stepped into his role as king, and the process of refining his character, His leadership skills and his trust in God made him one of the greatest kings Israel ever had. The process is not always easy. In fact, it's often painful. It can feel like a season of obscurity where you're doing the work but not seeing the results. It can be frustrating to be in a season where you know God has called you to something greater, but it feels like you're stuck in the waiting room. But understand this. God uses the process to prepare you for the weight of the promotion. If God were to promote you before you were ready, the weight of the responsibility could crush you. It's the process that builds your strength, your character, and your wisdom so that when the promotion comes, you can handle it. In the process, God is shaping us. He's teaching us patience, humility, perseverance, and trust. He's showing us how to rely on Him and how to keep our hearts pure. The process is not punishment, it's preparation. And when we understand that, we can embrace it with a different perspective. Instead of complaining about the delays, instead of being discouraged by the detours, we can trust that God is at work. We can trust that He's preparing us for the fullness of what He has in store. Think about the process of a diamond. A diamond starts as a rough stone, hidden deep in the earth. It's not a polished, shining gem from the start. It has to go through a process of cutting, shaping, and polishing. The process is intense and it takes time, but the result is a precious, valuable stone. If you skip the process, you don't get the finished product. The same is true for us. We may feel like we're being chipped away or refined in ways that are uncomfortable, but God is shaping us into something more beautiful, more valuable, more suited for the purpose He has for us. So, if you find yourself in a season where it feels like you're not moving forward, don't be discouraged, technically discouraged. If it feels like things are taking longer than you expected, or that you're going through trials, know that the process is not in vain. God is at work. He's preparing you for what's next. Embrace the process, trust in His timing, and know that promotion will come in due season. You won't be promoted until you're ready to handle the responsibility of what God is about to entrust you with. And when the promotion comes, you'll look back and see that it was the process that made you who you are today. Obedience in the small things opens the door to greater things. We live in a world that often prioritizes the big moments, the grand gestures, and the showy acts of success. We admire the person who lands the big contract, launches the startup, or speaks on a major stage. But what we often fail to realize is that all of those big moments are built upon a foundation of small acts of obedience, often unnoticed and uncelebrated by the world. The small things open the door to greater things because they test our ability to be trusted with more. God sees every act of obedience, no matter how small, and He will reward it in ways we can't always see in the moment. Keep being faithful, even in the small things, because your obedience is setting you up for the greater things God is preparing for you.